July 13th, 1991. Michael Hutchence stands backstage at Wembley Stadium in London, looking out at 73,000 people filling one of the most iconic venues in rock history. This is the same stadium where Queen delivered their legendary Live Aid performance 6 years earlier. The same stadium where countless rock legends have proven themselves. And tonight, INXS isn't the opening act. They're not the support band. They're the headliners. 6 guys from Sydney, Australia, about to walk out and command a space designed for football matches and massive concerts, about to prove they belong in the same conversation as the giants of rock. Michael is nervous, which is rare for him. He's performed to huge crowds before, but Wembley is different. Wembley is validation. Wembley is history. And in about 20 minutes, Michael and INXS are going to deliver a performance that represents the absolute peak of their career, a moment they'll never quite reach again. This is the story of INXS at Wembley Stadium in 1991, their biggest show ever, and what it meant to reach the summit. Let me set the context for where INXS was in the summer of 1991, because timing is everything in this story. The Kick album had been released in October 1987, and it had turned INXS into global superstars. By 1991, Kick had sold over 10 million copies worldwide. They'd had 4 major hit singles from that album. They'd won 5 MTV Video Music Awards in one night. They'd toured the world relentlessly. The X album had followed in September 1990 with hits like Suicide Blonde and Disappear. INXS was at the absolute height of their commercial and critical success. But commercial success is one thing. Headlining Wembley Stadium is another thing entirely. Wembley has a capacity of around 72,000 people for concerts, though some shows have squeezed in more. It's not just about the numbers, though. Wembley has a mystique, a history. The greatest artists in the world have played there. The Rolling Stones, David Bowie, Queen, U2, Madonna, Michael Jackson. Getting offered a Wembley headline slot isn't just a booking, it's a statement. The promoters are saying you're big enough, important enough to fill this massive space. And INXS, 4 years after Kick changed their lives, had reached that level. The concert was part of INXS's Summer XS Tour, a massive touring cycle supporting both Kick and X. They'd been on the road for what felt like forever, playing stadiums and arenas across Europe, North America, Australia, Asia. The Wembley show was positioned as one of the tour's major events, a highlight that would be filmed and recorded. The pressure was enormous. This wasn't just another show. This was a statement concert, a career-defining moment. Preparation for Wembley started weeks in advance. The band rehearsed extensively, fine-tuning the set list, working on the staging and production elements. For a stadium show, you can't just plug in and play the way you might in a club or even an arena. The space is too big, the sightlines are too long, the acoustics are challenging. You need massive video screens so people in the back can see what's happening. You need a lighting rig that can create atmosphere across 70,000 people. You need a sound system powerful enough to reach everyone, but balanced enough that it doesn't turn into mush. INXS had a professional production team handling all of this, but the band still had to adapt their performance to the scale. The set list for Wembley was carefully constructed to take the audience on a journey. They'd open with high-energy tracks to establish dominance and get the crowd engaged immediately. Then they'd mix in some of the ballads and mid-tempo songs to show their range. The classics from Kick would be strategically placed throughout to keep energy high. And they'd build to a massive finale that would leave 70,000 people screaming for more. Every decision about song order, about when Michael would talk to the crowd, about pacing and dynamics, all of it was planned to maximize the impact of performing in such an enormous space. Michael's approach to performing at Wembley was interesting. In interviews leading up to the show, he talked about how you can't perform to 70,000 people the same way you perform to a club audience of a few hundred. In a small venue, you can make eye contact with individuals, create intimate moments. In a stadium, you're performing to a sea of humanity. You have to be bigger, more theatrical, more deliberately physical in your movements so people in the furthest seats can read your energy and emotion.
Michael studied footage of great stadium performers, Queen's Freddie Mercury especially, trying to understand how to command that much space without losing the connection with the audience. The day of the show, July 13, 1991, the band arrived at Wembley early for soundcheck. Walking into an empty Wembley Stadium is a surreal experience. The space is massive, overwhelming, rows and rows of seats stretching up and away, the field where they'd be performing feeling small compared to the vastness surrounding it. During soundcheck, they'd play through parts of songs, testing the sound system, making sure the mix was right, getting comfortable with the space. And even during soundcheck, with just the crew and a few people scattered around, the enormity of what they were about to do was sinking in.
Michael's pre-show ritual at Wembley was probably similar to his ritual before any major show. Some quiet time to center himself, maybe a drink or two would calm the nerves, vocal warm-ups to make sure his voice was ready for 2 hours of singing. The other band members would have their own rituals, their own ways of preparing mentally and physically for the performance. Kirk Pengilly has talked about the nervous energy backstage before big shows, everyone dealing with it differently. Some guys would pace, some would joke around to release tension, some would sit quietly and visualize the performance. As the crowd started filing into Wembley that July evening, the energy began to build. 73,000 people, mostly British and European INXS fans, who'd been waiting for the show for months. They'd bought tickets, traveled to London, and now they were here, filling this massive stadium, ready to see INXS at the peak of their powers. The roar of that many people talking and cheering even before the show starts is a sound unlike anything else. It's a physical presence, a vibration you feel in your chest. The lights went down, the crowd erupted, and INXS walked out onto the Wembley stage to a wall of sound that must have been almost overwhelming. Michael, Andrew, Tim, John, Kirk, and Gary, 6 guys from Sydney facing 73,000 people. The opening song, whatever it was, probably something high energy like Guns in the Sky or New Sensation, hit like an explosion. The production team would have coordinated lights, pyrotechnics, video screens, all timed to create maximum impact. And Michael would have launched into his frontman performance, running across the massive stage, engaging the crowd, his voice cutting through the noise. One of the challenges of performing at Wembley is the physical stamina required. The stage is huge, and a good frontman uses all of it. Michael would have been running back and forth, using the full width of the stage to engage different sections of the audience. That's exhausting, especially over a 2-hour show. Add in the vocal demands of singing INXS's catalog, songs that require power and range and endurance, and you're asking a performer to be an athlete. Michael was in his early 30s at this point, in good shape, but Wembley would have pushed him to his limits physically. The setlist progression at Wembley would have taken the audience through INXS's career. Early songs from their first albums, showing where they came from, big hits from Kick that everyone knew and sang along with, newer material from X that proved they weren't just resting on past success. Each song would have been a moment, a connection point with the crowd. Need You Tonight would have had 70,000 people singing the dum-dum-da-dum hook. Never Tear Us Apart would have been a sea of lighters and emotional swaying. Devil Inside would have been pure energy and release. Michael's interactions with the crowd between songs are an important part of the Wembley performance. In a stadium setting, you need to connect verbally as well as musically. Michael would have talked to the crowd, acknowledged being at Wembley, maybe shared a story or made a joke. These moments give the audience a breather between intense songs, but they also make the show feel personal despite the massive scale. Michael was good at this, finding the balance between rock star confidence and genuine warmth. There's something transcendent about a great stadium concert when everything clicks. The band is locked in, playing tight and powerful. The crowd is engaged and energetic. The production elements enhance rather than distract. The energy creates this feedback loop where the audience fuels the band and the band fuels the audience, and it just keeps building. Wembley '91 had that. You can hear it in the bootleg recordings that exist. You can see it in the footage that was captured. There was magic happening. Midway through the show, there would have been a moment where Michael just stopped and looked out at 73,000 people all there for INXS. That's got to be an almost incomprehensible feeling. 6 years earlier, INXS had played Live Aid at this same venue as a relatively unknown band trying to break through. Now they were back as headliners, as proven rock stars. The journey from there to here would have flashed through Michael's mind in that moment. All the work, all the touring, all the recordings, all the compromises and struggles, it had all led to this. Standing on the Wembley stage with 73,000 people screaming your name. That's validation on a scale most artists never experience. The other band members have talked in interviews over the years about what Wembley meant to them. For Andrew Ferris, who wrote most of the music, hearing 70,000 people singing his melodies must have been overwhelming. For John Ferris on drums, keeping the rhythm solid for that many people, being the backbone that holds everything together, that's enormous responsibility and enormous pride. For Kirk, Tim, and Gary, being on that stage, contributing to something bigger than any individual, that's what being in a successful band is all about. As the show built toward its finale, the energy would have been at its peak. The final songs, probably closing with something massive like New Sensation or bringing back a huge hit for an encore, would have been designed to leave the audience exhausted and exhilarated. Lights flashing, pyro going off, the entire band giving everything they had left. Michael's final moments on stage at Wembley '91, arms spread, accepting the crowd's adoration. That image represents INXS at their absolute peak. This is as big as they'd ever be. This is the summit. The walk off stage after a show like Wembley is probably a mix of exhaustion and elation. You've just given everything you have for 2 hours. Your body is spent, your voice is raw, your emotions are overwhelming. But you also know you just did something special, something that will be remembered. Backstage after the show, there would have been celebration. The band, the crew, management, friends, everyone who'd worked to make this moment happen, all sharing in the triumph. Drinks flowing, hugs and congratulations, the release of all that built-up tension and pressure. The reviews of the Wembley show were overwhelmingly positive. British music press, which could be notoriously harsh, acknowledged that INXS had delivered a stadium-worthy performance. They'd proven they belonged on that stage, that they could command that space and that audience. For a band from Australia, getting that validation in Britain, the home of so much great rock music, that mattered. It meant they weren't just popular, they were respected. But here's the bittersweet part of the Wembley story. July 1991 was the peak. INXS would continue touring and recording for years after, but they'd never quite reach that level again. The music industry was changing. Grunge was about to explode and shift what rock music looked like. INXS, with their polished MTV aesthetic, would soon be associated with the 80s, even though they continued making music through the 90s. Wembley '91 represents a moment frozen in time, the absolute highest point before the slow descent began. There's footage of the Wembley concert that exists in various forms. Some of it was broadcast on TV, some exists as bootlegs, some was used in documentaries. Watching it now, you can see Michael at the height of his powers as a performer. He's confident, charismatic, completely in command. He moves like someone who owns that stage, who knows exactly how to work a crowd of any size. It's a masterclass in stadium rock frontman performance. And knowing that just 6 years later Michael would be dead, that footage becomes even more precious. This is Michael when everything was going right, when the future seemed limitless. The Wembley show also captures the band dynamic at a good point. INXS had been together for over a decade by '91. They knew each other intimately as musicians and as people. The tightness of their performance at Wembley reflects all those years of playing together, touring together, working toward this moment together. In later years, as tensions within the band grew and Michael's personal life became more chaotic, that unity would fracture. But at Wembley '91, they were still a cohesive unit, 6 guys working toward a common goal. For the 73,000 people who were actually there at Wembley that night, it's a memory they carry forever. Being part of a great concert, especially at a historic venue like Wembley, creates a bond among everyone who experienced it. Those fans can say, I was there when INXS headlined Wembley. I saw Michael Hutchence at his peak. That's something special, something that can't be taken away. The economic and logistical scale of a Wembley Stadium concert is worth considering. The production costs are enormous. You're paying for a massive sound system, a complex lighting rig, video screens, stage construction, security, insurance, staff, travel and accommodation for the band and crew. You need to sell a lot of tickets just to break even. INXS sold 73,000 tickets, which means they cleared the financial hurdle and made profit. But more than the money, pulling off Wembley successfully proved they could operate at the highest level of the music business. In the broader arc of INXS's career, Wembley '91 sits right at the inflection point. Everything before was building toward this moment. Everything after was, in some ways, trying to recapture this moment and the success it represented. It's like reaching the summit of a mountain. You can enjoy the view from the top, but you can't stay there forever. Eventually, you have to come back down. INXS's descent from the Wembley peak was gradual rather than sudden, but it was real. Michael's personal journey intersects with the Wembley moment in interesting ways. In July '91, he was 31 years old, at his physical and artistic peak, riding high on success and fame. His relationship status, his mental health, his substance use, all the issues that would compound in later years were either not present yet or were manageable. Wembley represents Michael before the serious decline began. It's Michael when being Michael Hutchence was still more blessing than curse. There's also something to be said for the British audience at Wembley specifically. British rock fans have high standards and long memories. They'll turn on you if they think you're not worthy. But if they embrace you, if they show up 73,000 strong to see you headline Wembley, that's genuine love and respect. INXS earned that from the British audience through years of great records and performances. Wembley was the British audience saying, "You're one of the great bands. You belong here." Looking at Wembley '91 through the lens of music history, it's interesting where it fits. This was right before Nirvana's Nevermind would change rock music forever. This was the tail end of the MTV era, where polished, professional rock bands could fill stadiums. Within a couple years, the aesthetic would shift dramatically toward grunge and alternative, and bands like INXS would seem like relics of an earlier time. Wembley '91 is almost like the last gasp of '80s rock dominance, even though it's technically '91. The legacy of the Wembley concert lives on in different ways. For INXS diehard fans, it's a legendary show, talked about with reverence. For the band members, it's a memory of their finest hour, the moment when everything they'd worked for came together perfectly. For music historians, it's a data point marking the peak of INXS's commercial and cultural impact. And for casual fans or people who discovered INXS later, the existence of Wembley footage gives them a window into what made INXS great. If you're an INXS fan who's never seen footage from Wembley '91, seek it out. Watch Michael work that massive stage. Watch the band deliver a tight, powerful performance. Watch 73,000 people losing their minds to Need You Tonight. It'll give you a sense of scale and impact that's hard to grasp from studio recordings alone. This was INXS live, at their biggest, at their best. In Michael's final years, did he ever think back to Wembley '91? Did he remember what it felt like to stand on that stage with 73,000 people cheering for him? When things were falling apart in his personal life, when the music industry had moved on from INXS's style, when he was struggling with depression and substance use, did Wembley feel like a lifetime ago? Or did it provide some comfort, some proof that he'd achieved something real and meaningful? We can't know, but it's worth wondering. Wembley Stadium, July 13th, 1991. INXS headlining, 73,000 people. Michael Hutchence at his absolute peak as a performer. The band at the height of their powers. Production at a massive scale. Everything working perfectly. This was the dream realized. This was the summit. This was the moment when 6 guys from Sydney, Australia proved they belonged among rock's greatest acts. It would never be quite this good again, but for one night at Wembley, it was perfect.